The tunnels were endless, 12 hours of marching through the dark, hunting goblins and navigating the cold stone. Ordinary men would have collapsed, their minds broken by the monotony and the fear. But Kalem kept moving. Beside him, Yernil was reaching her limit. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She asked for rest, not out of laziness, but from the simple biological necessity of a body pushed too far. He agreed. Pushing harder now would only lead to mistakes later. They made camp in a quiet corner of the labyrinth. The fire crackled, a rare comfort in a place designed to kill. Yernil offered him food, her face bright with gratitude. She thanked him for saving her, for staying with her. She remembered the offer he had rejected earlier, the chance to join a stronger group and leave her behind. She asked why he stayed. Kalem did not give her a sentimental answer. Abandoning a trustworthy comrade was inefficient. It was a calculation. A loyal ally was a resource he could not afford to waste. She slept, believing in his kindness. He watched the fire, believing in his strategy. As he closed his eyes, the reality of this world shifted. It was not a dream that greeted him, but a system notification. Rest mode entered. He had leveled up. The mechanics were revealing themselves, stripping away the illusion of a fantasy world and exposing the rigid skeleton of a game underneath. He had 2 stat points to distribute. He did not hesitate. In his previous life, he had maximized intelligence. Here, he did the same. Raw power was the only way to smash through the defenses of the dungeon. He turned his attention to Yernil. The system allowed him to view her growth as well. She had leveled up, her agility increasing naturally. But the true prize was her new special skill. Sound mapping. It allowed her to detect enemy positions through audio cues, nullifying blindness. It was the perfect tool for a scout. He distributed her points into agility. A slow archer was a dead archer. He was building a unit, optimizing every variable for the battles to come. When morning broke, it was time to verify the investment. Theory meant nothing without application. Kalem stepped away from the dying embers of the fire and raised his wand. He cast Fireball. Yesterday, it might have been a small flare. Today, fueled by his increased intelligence, it was a weapon. The explosion shattered a stone shield and shook the walls. Yernil stared in shock, but Kalem only felt satisfaction. This was not a dream. The numbers were real. The power was real. They moved with new purpose. The next objective was the exit gate. In this dungeon, the location was randomized. Some unfortunates wandered for weeks until they starved. Kalem and Yernil found it quickly. But in the abyss, good luck is often a prelude to a difficult choice. The exit room was not empty. A group stood guard by the heavy iron doors. Kalem observed them from a distance. A priestess, a beastman warrior, and a dwarf. Their gear was worn but high quality. They were veterans, a balanced party that had seen combat. The priestess noticed them first. She called out to them, identifying them by their slave collars. There was no immediate hostility, only the awkward tension of 2 predator groups meeting in a cage. They mocked Yernil's bow and Kalem's dual wands, but their arrogance was a mask. They were waiting at the exit, yet they had not left. Kalem saw the loose backpack on the floor. He saw the gap in their formation. He asked the question they did not want to answer. They had lost a comrade. The dwarf admitted it. Their mage had been struck down by a black hornet on the first floor. The priestess claimed she had cast soul preservation, that a revival scroll could save him. But they were trapped here, unable to leave to fetch one. They were a broken party, missing their primary source of magical damage. They looked at Kalem with new interest. They asked if he had a fireball wand. The beastman urged the others to recruit him. They were desperate. The gate boss inside the exit room required a specific counter. Kalem analyzed the situation instantly. It wasn't an undead monster, or the priestess would have handled it. It wasn't a troll or a salamander. He named the monster before they could. A venomic spider. The veterans were stunned. A slave mage should not have known such details, but Kalem knew the dungeon better than those who had lived in it for years. The venomic spider was a nightmare of speed and poison. It moved across the ceiling, binding intruders in webs before delivering a lethal bite. One misstep meant death. The only reliable counter was a fire mage to burn the webs and force the creature to the ground. That was why they needed him. They didn't want an ally, they wanted a flamethrower. The priestess and the beastman extended the invitation. Join them temporarily, defeat the boss. The exit gate would appear and they could all escape. Yernil looked at Kalem, her eyes wide. The veteran warrior, Virtanen, did not mask his cruelty with lies. He simply presented the arithmetic of survival. The gate had a limit. 4 souls could pass through safely. Any more, and the collapse would claim them all. The veteran party numbered 3. Kalem would make 4. There was no seat for the elf. Virtanen offered a pragmatic trade. Abandon the girl, Yernil, and survive. Or stay and perish. He even apologized, a polite gesture that did nothing to change the lethal nature of his offer. He looked at the mage, expecting a quick calculation. He expected the man to choose life. Kalem considered it. In the silence of his own mind, he admitted the temptation. Survival was the primary directive, but his calculation extended further than the gate. If he escaped alone, he would emerge as a penniless slave. The world outside the labyrinth would simply throw him back into the meat grinder. To truly escape, he needed more than an exit. He needed capital, and he needed the elf. Her skills were an asset he could not easily replace. He looked at Yernil. She was terrified, realizing she was the remainder in the equation. Kalem made his choice. He turned to the veterans and flipped the board. He would not join them. They would hire him. Virtanen laughed. The idea was absurd, a slave demanding a contract. But Kalem was already doing the math. To buy his freedom and Yernil's, he needed 6,000 gold. To survive the weeks after, he needed a surplus. He demanded 10,000 gold. The elf panicked at the number, but Kalem remained impassive. He knew the veterans' weakness. It was not their exhaustion, nor the danger of the floor. It was the corpse they carried. The preservation magic on their fallen comrade, Avison, was ticking down. If they delayed, they would return with a rotting body instead of a resurrectable ally. Their time was worth more than gold. The veterans conferred. The beastman, Zikal, and the cleric, Emma, hesitated. The price was extortionate. But the logic held. They were desperate. The haggling was brief. Virtanen offered 9,000. Kalem countered with 9,500. The dwarf ground his teeth and agreed. It was a fortune paid to a slave, but they had no alternative. The contract was formalized quickly. Emma invoked the goddess Nathaniel. A system covenant was formed. The gold would be paid upon the Virtanen party's safe exit. If they died, the contract was void. It was a gamble on their own competence. Kalem accepted. He told them they would not regret it. They moved toward the boss room. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of dust and old silk. The chamber was dark, the ceiling lost in shadow. Kalem's eyes scanned the environment. He noted the neutral objects in the corner, barrels filled with explosives, tools for the desperate. He warned the group about the webs on the floor, sticky, hindering terrain. Virtanen, impatient to end the venture, ignored the subtlety. He saw the webs on the ceiling and sought to burn them away. He did not wait for a plan. He simply acted. It was a mistake. The fire provoked the darkness. From the shadows above, the boss descended. The venomic spider, a monstrosity of chitin and poison, it dropped with the weight of a collapsing building. Panic flared. The dwarf shouted for a fireball, realizing too late that the ceiling was too high for a simple torch. The spider was upon them. Kalem did not panic. He had been waiting for the engagement to begin. He assessed the threat. The enemy was exposed. The window for damage was open. In a fair fight, they would struggle. But Kalem did not fight fair. He possessed the turn-based hourglass. He activated the artifact. The world turned grey. The screaming dwarf frozen in mid-breath. The falling spider suspended in the air. Time obeyed only the mage. A system window appeared. "It is your turn." Kalem stepped forward. He did not cast a single spell. He cued them. 1 fireball, 2, 3, 4. He drained his action points completely, stacking the destruction in a single frozen moment. He ended his turn. Time snapped back into motion. The resulting explosion was instantaneous. 4 detonations occurred simultaneously, tearing through the spider's defenses before gravity could even assert itself. The veterans were stunned. They had heard no incantations. They saw only the result, a wall of flame appearing from nothing. Kalem did not give them time to question him. He took command. He shouted for focus. This was the burst phase. Yernil, overcoming her fear, loosed arrows into the inferno. They were weak strikes, but they added to the rhythm. The spider shrieked, burning, and retreated into its patterns. Kalem recognized the script. He ordered the cleric to raise a barrier. The beastman, Zikal, bristled at taking orders from a rookie, but his instincts aligned with the command. As the barrier rose, he charged. He used a skill, leaping ambush, driving his blades into the beast's carapace. The spider recoiled and prepared its counter. Its abdomen swelled, glowing with toxic light, a poison explosion. The veterans knew this pattern. The cleric braced her constellation shield, preparing to tank the damage. That was the standard strategy. Absorb the blow, then strike. Kalem saw the inefficiency. Why mitigate the damage when you could prevent it entirely? He cast Ice Lance. The spell was precise. It struck the swelling poison sac, not to damage it, but to silence it. The frost spread instantly, freezing the biological bomb solid. The explosion died in the spider's gut. The rhythm of the battle broke. The veterans froze, confused by the sudden lack of an attack. Kalem shouted at the dwarf. The window was open. Virtanen snapped out of his daze. He realized the mage had just handed him the kill on a platter. He leapt, swinging his great axe with all his weight, great shattering cleave. The blade bit deep. The frozen sac shattered. The spider collapsed, its legs curling inward as the life left its massive frame. Silence returned to the chamber. The veterans exhaled, lowering their weapons. They believed it was over. The boss was dead. The exit was clear, but Kalem remained tense. His eyes did not leave the corpse. He knew this dungeon. He knew the game design. The venomic spider was a creature of malice. In the game, when the health bar hit 0, the mechanics did not always end. He looked at the webbing. It was beginning to glow. There was a very low chance, a statistical anomaly that most adventurers would never encounter. But Kalem knew his luck. The second phase was beginning. The silence that followed the spider's collapse was heavy, but it was the wrong kind of silence. The veterans exhaled, lowering their guards as if the dungeon had conceded defeat. They believed the script was finished. They saw a corpse and assumed victory. Kalem did not lower his wand. He looked up. In the logic of this world, mercy is a glitch. When a boss monster falls too easily, it is not luck. It is a prelude. The elf, Yernil, followed his gaze upward, her confusion shifting rapidly into horror. The darkness above them was not empty. It was moving. Thousands of eyes reflected the dim light. The ceiling was a carpet of pulsating sacs, spider eggs, a second phase. The veterans panicked, their celebration turning to ash in their mouths. They had never seen this pattern before. To them, it was a catastrophe. To Kalem, it was a probability calculation he had already solved. He did not waste breath on explanations. He ordered Yernil to grab the barrel of orc ale. She hesitated only for a fraction of a second before obeying, the sheer authority in his voice overriding her fear. She hurled the heavy cask into the air. The dwarf was baffled. He saw a waste of good supplies. Kalem saw a fuel source. He commanded the priest to cast light on Yernil's arrow. The shaft ignited with holy brilliance, illuminating the cavern as it soared upward. The light revealed the target, the central cluster of the egg sac throbbing with imminent hatchlings. The barrel reached the apex of its arc. The target was lit. The variables were set. Kalem's eyes narrowed. The world turned grey. The turn-based hourglass activated. Time froze. The falling debris hung suspended in the air. The shouts of the party members were silenced. In this frozen slice of reality, Kalem was the only thing that moved. He did not rush. He simply aimed. He cast a fireball. The spell left his wand, a streak of orange violence in a monochrome world. It connected with the barrel of alcohol just as time resumed its march. The chemical reaction was instantaneous. The explosion did not just burn, it obliterated. The shockwave scoured the ceiling, incinerating the eggs before they could hatch. The fire rained down like judgment, cleansing the chamber of the second phase before it truly began. Silence returned. This time it was real. The exit gate hummed to life, a circle of blue mana signaling the end of the raid. The veterans stared, their minds unable to reconcile the slave they had hired with the devastating efficiency they had just witnessed. The beastman approached, his mockery replaced by a jarring friendliness. He admitted he had thought Kalem was a saboteur. Now he saw a carry. The dwarf too looked at the slave with new eyes. They asked who he was before this. Kalem sat in the digital chair of his memory, a gamer addicted to a trash game. He pushed the image away. He told them he was just a slave at a magic academy. It was a lie, but truth is a currency not worth spending on temporary allies. They praised their luck. They praised his skill. But the transaction was not over. Kalem brought up the contract. He had set the fee at 9,500 gold, a number calculated based on the assumption that they would all die. He had expected to loot their corpses. The fact that they survived was a deviation. The dwarf laughed, agreeing they got their money's worth. He prepared to leave, but Kalem stopped them with a cold reminder of the fine print. The contract required the party to pass through the exit gate. The settlement of funds happened in the village. Yanil looked at the swirling blue portal. It was right there. Safety was a single step away. But the system of this world is designed to punish the greedy. High-value contracts are never settled in the dungeon. You have to survive the return trip to get paid. The realization hit the elf. If they did not make it back to town, the contract was void. It would be considered a party wipe. Kalem confirmed it. He had known this from the start. As they prepared to move, Kalem spotted a familiar backpack on the floor. It belonged to Avison, a name the veterans recognized. The beastman and the dwarf exchanged a look that lacked surprise. They explained that the backpack was loot from another slave team they had fought. Avison was dead. The dwarf offered the backpack to Kalem along with their remaining food supplies. To the veterans, the dead would just wait to be shed. They mentioned a resurrection scroll, but admitted they had already used one on Avison in the past. He had died again. Some people are simply not built for the labyrinth. The party stood before the gate. The raid was over, but the party dynamics were shifting. Yernil stopped. She looked at the veterans, then at Kalem. She made a calculation of her own, one based on emotion rather than mechanics. She asked the veterans to take Kalem with them. The request confused everyone. The contract stated that as long as one party member returned, it counted. Yernil believed that Kalem, a mage, could not survive the dungeon alone. She believed he was fragile. She handed over her share of the survival chance. She offered to stay behind in the labyrinth, sacrificing herself so that the slave could claim the gold and become a free man. She looked at him with tears in her eyes, trembling. She thanked him for keeping her alive this far. She told him to live on well. She stood alone in the darkness, clutching her bow, preparing to die for a man who had already calculated the outcome of this entire encounter. She did not understand that to the Turn-Bound Mage, her sacrifice was unnecessary. She thought this was a tragedy. She did not realize the player was still holding the controller. The veteran dwarf finally understood the value of the pieces on the board, but he was too late to change the nature of the game. He apologized for treating them as disposable inventory. He tried to correct the ledger with an offer that would turn the heads of most desperate men. He offered a formal recruitment, a 25% share of the profits, and a payment of 9,500 gold. For a slave, this was not just currency. It was a ticket to a life where death wasn't a daily probability. The elf, Yernil, looked at the mage with desperate eyes. She had already done her own calculations, though hers were based on sentiment, not survival. She was willing to remove herself from the equation. She begged the veterans to take him and leave her behind. She wanted to part with smiles, ready to die in the dark so he could walk into the light. She did not understand that her willingness to be discarded was exactly what made her valuable. The system intervened. A blue window shattered the sentimental moment, visible only to the one holding the hourglass. It presented an expansion opportunity. If he kept her by his side now, her trust would reach absolute capacity. 100%. The mage recognized the pattern immediately. This was not reality. It was a mechanic he had exploited 1,000 times in the game. In this world, abilities evolved through specific routes. The expansion was the ability to command party members. He visualized the implication. In a turn-based world, Action economy is the only currency that matters. A party member who acts on impulse is a liability. A party member who acts on command is a weapon. He imagined the possibilities, simple, direct orders to drop defenses or attack specific targets. A single point of action could alter the entire flow of combat. The dwarf party was strong, but they were chaotic. Yernil, under his direct control, offered tactical precision. The dwarf pressed for an answer. The mage triggered the hourglass. The world froze. He had 60 seconds of stolen time to weigh the variables. On one side, immediate freedom, gold, and the protection of veterans. On the other, a loyal archer and a permanent upgrade to his system. To an observer, rejecting the gold seemed like madness. To a survivor, it was simple arithmetic. He chose the asset that would scale. Time resumed. He rejected the offer. He took the girl's hand and declared they would stick to the original plan. The veterans were horrified. They saw two rookies choosing suicide. But the mage stood firm. He claimed that raising Yernil was the smarter move, masking his cold logic with the appearance of loyalty. He told himself he wasn't cold-hearted, just efficient. The veterans mistook his calculation for nobility. They called him crazy. They called him a hero. The beast man wept at his supposed selflessness. The priestess, Emma, saw a prime recruit for the Magic Academy. They projected their own morals onto his survival strategy. He let them believe it. It was easier than explaining that he had just acquired a controllable unit. He cut through the emotion quickly. He asked to buy the spider corpse. The dwarf, respecting the transaction, sold it for 1,500 gold, deducted from the future reward. Even in a touching farewell, business came first. The dwarf asked for the elf's name. She stammered, correcting his guess of Pretty Day to Yernil. He gave a thumbs up, a final gesture of camaraderie, and handed over a set of potions. The priestess offered a blessing, a buff that granted +1 to all stats and immunity to curses for 2 hours. In the early game, such buffs were critical windows of opportunity. The veterans used a mana stone to trick the gate, counting their group as a single entity to speed up the exit cycle. They stepped through the portal, promising to meet at the Adventurers Guild. Then the silence fell. Yernil crumbled, the adrenaline faded, leaving only the crushing weight of the dungeon. She collapsed on the stone floor, asking why he did it. She saw a dead end. The mage looked down at her. He felt no fear. This body had been steeped in the game's logic for too long. He had already run the numbers. He reached out and told her to stop crying. The system pinged. Her trust reached 100%. The command interface unlocked. He didn't offer comfort, he offered an order. Rip out that spider fang. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then obeyed. She was desperate to be useful, offering to be a shield, to die if asked. He told her to trust him. He checked the stats. His dexterity was 0, hers was 2. It was a matter of probability. She was the better tool for the extraction. He reviewed the constraints of his new power. Commands against her nature would fail. Impossible physical feats were out, but for now, simple instructions would suffice. She pulled the fang free. She cheered, holding the bloody trophy aloft with a bright smile. The tears were gone, replaced by the simple joy of success. The mage watched her, satisfied. Not because she was happy, but because the strategy was working. They could die at any moment, but as long as she followed orders, the odds were in his favor.